Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5. This is the show where we discuss local government, city politics, consumer affairs, and much, much more. My name is Larry McGlynn, and I am here with Lance Haver. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right, and for a change, I have some good news to report on, so it's always pleasant when something goes right somewhere.
All right, well, we're going to be looking forward to that. And we have Denise Clay Murray with us, but not visually, but audio. Is that Hi, Denise? Oh, maybe we don't have Denise at all right now. Okay, well, we'll have Denise with us later in the program. We have a big show tonight. We are going to be joined by Senator Bob Casey and Councilmember Derek Green, and then Lance will also be speaking with us. Now, Denise, do we have you now?
Yes.
There we go. How are you tonight, Denise?
Well, I'd be better if my camera were working, but I'm working on that.
All right. Well, we will hopefully be able to see you soon. But before we get to our interviews, I want to run through a couple things really quick. There are two major things that are coming up. And on this show, we talk a lot about the budget. So next week, Tuesday, January 25th, Mayor Jim Kenney and members of his team will be holding a city budget town hall where you can ask questions and hear about how the budget works. And it's part of something we've been doing on this show for a little while, where we have the budget director on to talk about the process, how revenue is collected, how it's spent, all those kinds of different things. So you'll hear more about that at this event. So they will cover how the city budget works and answer questions from community members. Space is limited, and participants will be compensated for their time. And they will be doing translations in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and French. So this is a very good event, very interesting event. There's a code here that I believe you can scan on your phone. If not, though, you can go to budget@phila.gov or call 311 to learn more about how you can participate in this program. Also, the city will be hosting city budget focus groups. The Philadelphia Budget Office is expanding who is involved in providing input into what the mayor will propose for the fiscal year 2023 budget that starts on July 1st, 2022. We are looking for your ideas before the proposed budget is put together, as they say on the flyer. So again, they're going to talk a little bit about how the budget works, and they want to hear ideas from people in the community. There are going to be 9 focus groups starting Saturday, January 30th, and running through Thursday, February 10th. If you are interested in this program, you can also go to budget@phila.gov or call 311 to let the city know that you're interested in participating. And I believe there's a small stipend for these programs. So I would really recommend, if you're interested in budget and interested in having your voice heard about the budget, that you seriously consider looking into one of these programs or one of these events. They're very interesting, and I'm glad the city's doing things like this, because the more we know about the budget, the better we feel about it, and the better we can make our voices heard. So we're very excited about those events. So last week, we spoke with Senator Bob Casey about a couple of different things, including voting rights and the Build Back Better bill. So here is our interview with Senator Robert Casey.
And maybe while we're getting it up, we should just mention that this is appearing no place else. That if you're not watching Hall Monitor on Comcast Channel 66 or listening on WPPM 106.5, you're not hearing directly from one of our senators.
That's right. That's right. And I think we have that queued up right now. So here is our interview with Senator Bob Casey. Okay, we are here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia with a very special guest, Senator Robert Casey. Senator, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you.
Great. So, Senator, the first thing I'd like to ask you about is the fate of the Build Back Better bill and what kind of impact this could have in Pennsylvania and maybe even Philadelphia as we look at the poverty situation we're dealing with here.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think one of the things that either we weren't able to do well in 2021 or we sometimes failed to do, and I say we, I mean Democratic senators. I won't speak to the House because they actually passed a bill, but we didn't really emphasize enough, I think, that what this bill would do to help people lift them up. And the big impact of this piece of legislation will be the lowering of costs for families that it will bring about. Lowering the cost of quality, affordable childcare, a huge issue in helping families and mostly women in the workforce get back to work. Lowering the cost of prescription drugs. My goodness, we've been talking about that for years. This bill would have that effect of lowering the cost of prescription drugs, especially for prescription medication like insulin, for example. It would lower the cost of home care by making home and community-based services more available for seniors, for people with disabilities, and making sure that enhancing the quality of that work by ensuring that the workforce isn't paid only $12 an hour. That's where we have a caregiving crisis in America. So many family members leaving one job, the job they're trained to do and the job they've had for years in many instances, leaving that job and taking an almost, in many cases, full-time job to take care of a loved one, a family member. So in the broad strokes would be that this legislation, Build Back Better, would help lower those costs. Now we have some work to do to get it back on track because we didn't meet our Christmas deadline, but I think we can. We're working on voting rights right now, so we have to keep other legislation kind of on a side, a parallel track. But I think we're going to get back to it soon and work to get it passed into law.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on WPPM 106.5.
Good evening, Senator. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Denise.
And you were talking about the Voting Rights Acts that are currently going through the House. The House passed their version on the day we're recording this, and the Senate is working on its version now. Where does that stand, especially in light of the announcements today that Senator Sinema and Manchin will not be voting to carve out a filibuster exception for this?
Yeah, we're at a point now in the Senate where after really now weeks and even you could even say it's months of debate about this legislation, and I would break it down into two parts. One is the Freedom to Vote Act, which is a kind of a comprehensive voting rights bill that was negotiated by Democrats and Democrats in the House and the Senate. The House ended up passing it a while back before the year was over, but in the Senate, I think it's important to remind people that bill has support from 50 Democrats. If you look at the votes we already took, we had several votes to advance the Freedom to Vote Act, but they were blocked by the advancement of the bill, I should say, was blocked by Republican senators. So you had 50 votes to advance it and have a debate, and 50 votes against having a debate. What we're headed into now is the not just the likelihood, but the certainty that preliminary step will be obviated by what the House did yesterday. So we're going to be able to actually debate the bill itself, not just debate whether we're going to, or not just vote on whether we're going to debate it. So that debate really has started, not formally, but it'll start in the next few days, and we're going to have a vote on that legislation so that every senator will be on record. The difficulty of getting to the next step where you're not just debating the bill, but you're actually having a pathway to get it passed into law involves a change in the Senate rules, and that's what we're working on right now as well. And I know there are at least 2 senators who have expressed opposition to a wholesale change in the rules, but we're still engaging with those senators to see if there isn't a pathway to at least, if you're not going to change the rules for every piece of legislation, figure out a way to change the rules so we can at least get voting rights passed into law. Because when you look at both the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis voting rights bill, it allows us not just to protect the right to vote in a way we've done so in the past, but really to have national standards on voting that are very consistent, frankly, with what we have in Pennsylvania. We had Act 77 passed with lots of Republican votes in the State General Assembly, the State House and State Senate. And when Republicans and Democrats came together in 2019 to pass that bill, to allow early voting, to allow mail-in voting, to allow counties to set up drop boxes, so that if you're 90 years old, you don't have to travel halfway across a big rural county. You can put your ballot in a drop box, or you can vote by mail and put it in the mail. That was a great advancement for Pennsylvania. And guess what? It worked. We know it from the numbers. We had the highest turnout for a presidential election in about at least 60 years, if not 100 years in Pennsylvania. And that was during a pandemic. Everyone was saying, oh my goodness, voter turnout's going to go way down. Guess what? More than 800,000 more people voted for president in Pennsylvania in 2020 than in 2016. And that happened even though there was a pandemic, even though people were predicting the turnout would go way down. That happened because Republicans and Democrats agreed to have different pathways to vote early, to vote by mail. And if anything, we should continue that in Pennsylvania and make sure that every state in the country and every has those opportunities. Every voter has a chance to vote in the way that they want. Why would we go back to the old days when you have to vote only on one day a year in a general election and only between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m.? That makes no sense in the busy modern world that people live in today when they have difficult jobs. And so I think we can advance the ball and get this done.
Okay, Larry, did you have another question?
Yes, Senator. I have one last thing I'd like to ask you about. I was watching the hearing, the Help Committee hearing on Tuesday, and
Yes.
There's an amazing contrast between you, your calmness, and the deliberate way that you conduct yourself, and some of your colleagues. As a United States Senator, and then us in the media, when we hear things from officials that are just plain wrong and harmful, how can we, all of us, work to overcome that and make sure that people are getting accurate, correct information that could be life-saving in some cases?
Well, you're right, Larry. That hearing was a demonstration of that. I think it was interesting that I think Senator Romney, a Republican senator, Republican of the state of Utah, who ran, as you know, we all know, for president in 2012 on the Republican side, Senator Romney used the word performance or performative, I forget which version of the word, talking about some of his own colleagues, at least two senators, who were attacking Dr. Fauci and not attacking him accurately with facts. I think if you watch that whole hearing, you saw a couple of things. You saw both senators on both sides of the aisle asking tough questions and demanding answers. I was asking the head of the CDC for her answers to some questions from things she said last week. So you had both parties doing that, but every once in a while you have senators who want to do a little performance instead of kind of put a spotlight on the truth. The good news is that's less frequent in those kinds of hearings. Most senators are trying to get accurate information about COVID-19 and testing and the variants and the science and where we're headed as a nation. And I'd say the last bit of good news is we hope that that this pandemic will be behind us soon if we all keep rolling up our sleeves and working together to put it behind us. And at the same time, whether it's on COVID or any other issue, the American people have more resources now to get accurate information. That's the irony. Because we see the proliferation of inaccurate information, lies about the election, lies in information that's not factual, The only good news there is there's plenty of other places to go to get accurate information. You know, I'm old enough to remember, both of you are probably much younger than I am. But in the old days, if you wanted to get information about a topic, guess what you had to do? You had to go to a bookshelf and pull off an encyclopedia. My 4 daughters don't even know what those are, because you can get instantaneous retrieval of information from the federal government, from all kinds of sources around the world. And I just urge people that to go to trusted sources of information. And often that means a local newspaper or a radio station or a television station to get information, in addition to what you can just get on, by doing your own research. But I think it's important to differentiate between a trusted source and a source that has a bias that colors the view that they have in terms of providing information.
Well, Senator Casey, we can't thank you enough for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for the time. We're grateful.
Thank you, sir. All right, that was our interview with Senator Robert Casey, and we'd like to thank the senator for joining us and being very forthright with us, Denise.
Yeah, it was a good interview because he chatted with us a little bit afterward about, some of the stuff that was going on in Congress and different things. And the thing is, Joe Biden just finished like an hour and 15-minute press conference a few minutes ago. And one of the things he said in the press conference was that the obstruction that he's getting from Republicans was even worse than what he saw in the Obama administration. And I'm like, and you're surprised by that? But, but you have guys like Bob Casey who are like, I remember when this body was actually able to, do something bipartisan, like, I don't know, pass voting rights. I mean, Strom Thurmond was a notorious segregationist. He was probably like the poster child for racists everywhere. And yet he still reauthorized the Voting Rights Act several times. So, the Bob Caseys of the world are probably sitting in Congress, sitting in the Senate most of the time saying, what the heck? But they need to understand that politics is a numbers game. And what everybody needs to focus on for 2022, if you want the dynamic to change, is to get some of the more obstructionist elements in the Senate out of the Senate, because that's the only way you're going to solve anything.
I was sorry he didn't take a little bit of a longer view when he talked about getting good information and being able to sort out what's true from what's not true. By talking about, we don't teach civics in schools any longer. We don't teach current events in schools any longer. And a lot of the mistakes that were made in switching to high testing, looking at all of the high risk testing, we've lost some of our youth and our young people. I appreciate
I think we're losing Lance here.
Understand it. Very hard to figure out.
Okay. Lance, we'll come back to you after our next interview to finish that thought, because it looks like you froze up a little bit there. So our next interview that we did earlier today, actually, Denise, is with Councilmember Derek Green. And we spoke about one of our favorite topics, public banking, and a lot of other things, including some things that he might be looking for in this upcoming council session. So
but the one question we didn't ask him was he running for mayor?
That's right. That's right. Well, next time he's on, we'll make sure we ask him about
We'll have to do that.
All right, here's our interview with Councilmember Derek Green. Okay, we are here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia with Councilmember Derek Green. Councilmember, thank you so much for being with us.
No problem, Larry. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And Happy New Year to you. I haven't seen you since 2021, and we're off to a rousing start to 2022.
That's right. And Happy New Year to you too, Councilman. So the first thing I'd like to ask you about is something that we always talk about because it's so interesting and something that we've been following very closely here. Where are we right now in the public banking process?
So with the public bank initiative that I've been working on for some time, we had a finance committee hearing in December. The bill was voted out of the finance committee. We had a first reading in front of all of City Council before we wrapped up our council session for 2021. Our first session back is Thursday, actually tomorrow. And we are working on some amendments from our conversations with Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities. We've also been talking with the Pennsylvania Bankers Association, the Cross-State Credit Union Organization, and some other advocacy groups. Our goal is to have these conversations and then get to an amendment that we hopefully will be able to introduce and get that circulated to members of council, have it introduced. And the goal is to have this legislation passed hopefully before the mayor's budget address or shortly thereafter.
Okay, and so once that happens, if that gets passed, say in March, what is and maybe we don't know yet, but is there a tentative timeline for how long it takes from that legislation being passed to actually having the bank founded?
Right. Well, the next step is getting financing for this institution that's going through the budget process. That's why we're trying to get this passed by before the mayor does his budget address or shortly thereafter. And then looking at getting access for both the seed dollars for operations as well as the capitalization dollars to get this initiative started. And once again, as I stated in the past, our first step is creating this municipal authority called the Philadelphia Public Financial Authority. That's the first step. Once that is up and running, and also that entity will become a community development financial institution, then we'll be able to use that entity to actually create the public bank to hold municipal deposits.
So speaking of budget season, it's one of the most interesting times for us. We're endlessly fascinated by it, and you play an integral role in this. What are some of the budget priorities we should be looking at to reduce poverty and the violence epidemic as we move through this process?
Well, this year, a lot of us are really focused on the fact that last year we had 562 homicides in the city of Philadelphia. On top of the 500 homicides we had the year before. So definitely there's going to be a focus on public safety this year in the budget. Last year we allocated additional money to address public safety. So I'll be looking at how we address the issue, but also I want to really focus on how do we work more collaboratively together. And I think that's something that has not been occurring, and I think we need to be a little more efficient. I know the district attorney is talking about additional dollars for forensics, and there's been some additional movement in that space by the police department. But I think we need to really look at, are we getting the return on investment on the dollars we're spending in public safety, and really to use those dollars and really focus on the areas that have had the most challenges in our city in reference to gun violence. Late last year, Attorney General Shapiro and Police Commissioner Outlaw had a press conference where they said that in the 16th and 19th police districts in West Philadelphia, there was a reduction in the shootings in those police districts by working collaboratively. We need to build upon that. I know that a little before that press conference, District Attorney Krasner and Commissioner Outlaw talked about in some of the Operation Pinpoint areas, which are the areas that have the highest amount of gun violence. They've also started to see a reduction coming out of the summer into the fall. So just being a much more collaborative process in how we work together to address public safety, and being more accountable. That's me as a member of City Council, that's the administration, the DA, the police department, as well as the Attorney General's office. I'm also looking to see what additional help we can get at the federal level. President Biden has not appointed a U.S. attorney for the Eastern District. That person, she or he, will also be responsible for helping us in criminal justice work. So I think we need to bring together all of these agencies, the local, state, and federal, to really address this in a collaborative way so we don't repeat another 500 homicides for the third year in a row.
And in general, it always seemed to me that when the budget is being prepared and when the mayor makes his budget address, even before that, every dollar is pretty much accounted for. There really isn't a lot of room to maneuver and change things around. But with that in mind, it's a very difficult question, and maybe you can't answer it right now, but are there areas where we really need to be spending more money? And if so, where does that money come from? Where do you take it from to put it somewhere else?
Well, I mean, some would say we definitely need to spend more money in lights inspection. That's been an issue that's been debated for a number of years, that more money is needed. Al and I, we had that tragic fire on January 5th in Fairmount. Now, that was in a Philadelphia Housing Authority property. But, as a member of the National League of Cities on the Executive Committee, I talked with colleagues in other parts of the country, and many of us were, in mourning in what happened in New York, which was not a public housing property, but it was a privately owned property. And so that makes us all think about those potential fires and real crisis issues in our cities as it relates to license inspection. So I think we need to do a better job of how we allocate resources there. I will also be looking at the budget in a very macro way, because I'm part of the tax review working group. Now, we've had multiple working groups on trying to look at our tax issues in the city. I'm really concerned because even though we brought in $1.4 billion from the American Rescue Plan, if you see what's happening right now in our center city commercial core, and I think from Paul Levy's State of Center City report, our commercial office buildings are at best 40% occupied. So that means that people that historically worked in the city before the pandemic but lived outside the city, that non-resident wage tax was being collected. Now it's not being collected. And so I have a real concern that going forward, as people become more and more comfortable, and now we're going into almost getting close to the third year of this pandemic, people have changed their habits, their lifestyles, and their work environments and gotten used to working remotely, especially those that traditionally worked in our center city core. And that's a loss of revenue. So we got to really focus on what we're going to do in reference to non-resident wage taxes, and what steps are we going to take from a tax policy perspective to really do all that we can to bring those who traditionally worked in the city back to work in the city. We've also got to continue to address the issue of public safety, which I talked about earlier. But these are going to be major issues. And if we don't find a way to get that revenue back into our city, my concern is that in the future, we're going to have to find ways to make up for those lost hours. And that's either going to be an increase in taxes or a reduction in services. And definitely do not want to see that. So that's why we've got to really be creative in trying to, bring back that non-resident wage tax and try to get it back to levels where it was before the pandemic.
And you had mentioned the ARP funds. In a couple conversations with the administration, they told us that almost the entire $1.4 billion is really going to go to fill budget holes, because there's about a $1.5 billion reduction in wage tax and all the different taxes. And do you think that that's the right course of action, or should some of that money be allocated for other programming, anti-violence program, anti-poverty? What do you think about that?
Well, last year in the budget process, council collectively supported putting additional funds into anti-violence initiatives. I would see that being another push this year because of that troubling statistic of 562 homicides last year. So I will see. I think there'll be a definite move to do more of that this year. And we'll look at the mayor's proposal. It's a 5-year plan, and the administration has made some proposals and also make some projections, but except for I think the 2009, maybe 2010 because of the Great Recession, and then of course the 2021 budget based on the pandemic, we've generally brought in more revenue than has been projected. So we need to look at all of these factors. We're gonna have to make some really challenging discussions and have some challenging conversations within council. But I really do have a fear that even though we're going to allocate dollars for some budget holes, if we don't make a collaborative effort to grow the pie, then we're going to end up having to, either reduce services or tax those. And I'm not saying necessarily this year, but in future years of those that least can afford to do that, just because we don't have the revenue that we had before the pandemic.
I'd like to bring Denise Clay Murray here on WPPM 106.5.
Hello, Councilman. How are you?
Happy New Year to you. How you doing?
I'm good. Happy New Year to you as well.
All
Now,
right.
you mentioned that to get the tax revenue that we need that used to come in the form of out of state, of people coming in and working, that's not really happening anymore due to the pandemic. When you said we need to find creative ways, what creative ways, when you say that, what do you mean? And do you have some examples?
Well, one of the things I've talked about is that other jurisdictions were very aggressive in trying to kickstart their hospitality industry. So, I'm a member of the Convention and Business Bureau, being involved in national cities and present Democratic municipal officials. I've seen what other cities have done with some of their dollars. I remember the fall of 2020 watching a 49ers and Ravens game. I know you're a fan of the Ravens, or at least your household is a fan of the Ravens.
Yes.
And they were advertising during that game. Now, this is in the Philadelphia media market, Monday Night Football game, but the marketing group for Visit Baltimore was advertising. Now, this is December, maybe November of 2020. So remember where we were at that time. We didn't have vaccinations that were on the horizon, but they were advertising, come to Baltimore, visit Baltimore, come to inner city, come to Inner Harbor, come in the spring. And we've got mask mandates, and we've done this to make things safe and secure so you can enjoy this experience in our city. They were doing that in late fall of 2020 as people started to think about, okay, vacations, getaways, short visits, to try to attract people to Baltimore to jumpstart their hospitality industry. And they were using CARES dollars. And this is before we had the American Rescue Plan dollars, because they saw that as a very important aspect of their local economy. Other jurisdictions, as we got into first quarter of 2021, Bucks County, other areas around Philadelphia were doing the same thing. Now, we had the Ready, Set, Go initiative to try to do that, but we really need to do it from a perspective of our center city and come back to the city to work in the city. Is that providing additional dollars to Visit Philadelphia and other entities to do kind of directing them to take their marketing efforts from just hospitality outside of Philadelphia and bring those people to Philadelphia from hospitality, or trying to focus on how do we bring people back to work in the city and doing it from a business attraction perspective, which is something we really have not done as a city. When Governor Rendell was mayor, he helped start at that time the Greater Philadelphia Hospitality Tourism Committee, which became Visit Philadelphia. And that and the Convention and Business Bureau really helped to kickstart our hospitality industry. But we really need to start making some critical efforts. And this is an initiative that's going to be similar to what happened when we went after the Amazon initiative, where if you had the city, from the mayor, city council, various city officials are all supporting that, to the public, to the nonprofit sector, institutions and hospitals and universities, the for-profit sector, the Chamber of Commerce, all coming together to really package why people should be in Philadelphia. I think we need that same type of energy in reference to why you should want to be in Philadelphia and work in Philadelphia, and the vibrancy of our city, and why this is a great place to work and live. I think that type of energy that we're going to need as we try to get back to where we are pre-pandemic.
Now, you mentioned the fire in Fairmount and the people that were killed in that. Is affordable housing and the city's lack thereof something else that's going to get tackled in this budget? And if so, has anyone discussed how you're going to do it? Because this has been a problem for a while now.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, this has been an issue that I've been focused on for some time. In fact, last year, I put a ballot question for the voters in reference to the Housing Trust Fund, because dollars come to the Housing Trust Fund by various fees, but that did not give us the type of sustainable funding that I think we needed, because people can buy more or less real estate, and people can transfer more or less properties, and those fees, income from those fees can go up and down. And so through the Housing Trust Fund ballot question that the voters approved, that called for 0.5% of our general fund dollars to go into the Housing Trust Fund to provide about $20 million for affordable housing in our city. And I felt that was something that we should dedicate on an annual basis, and the voters of the city of Philadelphia supported that. And I think that is one step, but we've got to do others in reference to how to address affordable housing. There's been various questions about what we do in reference to looking at multifamily properties. There's some who've talked about accessory dwelling units, smaller houses or tiny houses. I've heard other people talking about what's the process that we as a city use for regulating and licensing rooming houses, as another idea. So I think there's going to be a robust conversation about this issue. Also, we should be pressing upon our federal government, because it's been over the years, going back from when Bill Clinton was president, and we had Hope 6, and the Hope 6 initiative was basically how do we get rid of high-rise multifamily apartment buildings and make that more of a scattered site type of housing. But when you take down these high rises and you get to a scattered site, like 2-story building, you are going to have less units. So that also added to having less public housing in the city. And then the fact that the properties in the city of Philadelphia have increased exponentially over time. So all of these are issues that we need to look at, and we need to look at what's happening in other cities. And I've had conversations with colleagues in Portland about some of the ideas they're doing. And we'll look to other cities and jurisdictions as well as try to make the programs that we have more effective to address the issue of housing affordability in Philadelphia.
Now, earlier you were talking about the public bank and the board that would have to be formed to make it happen. Who is on this board? Is it bankers? Is it members of the public? Who is on this board?
So with the public bank initiative, and as I was talking with Larry earlier, we're creating the Philadelphia Public Financial Authority, which is a municipal authority. So we had to follow the state's economic development finance law, but also work within the guise of the U.S. Treasury and their community development financial institution. So we actually had to create 2 boards. One is a board appointed by the mayor, and that board would have people who had an economic development background in issues of housing and community development, and just a wide range of backgrounds in reference to trying to address the issue. So that board is appointed by the mayor, but then that mayor appointee board will appoint a separate board, which is a policy board. The policy board is going to be the one responsible for making the decisions in reference to letters of credit and credit enhancements. And so that entity had to be separate, then separate apart from the supervision and control from the public sector. And so that's why we have these 2 interlocking boards, one appointed by the mayor, and then that corporate board, which sets broad policy, will appoint the policy board, which will be those who are focused on the credit enhancements and the letter of credit decision-making. They also will be people that have had a background in economic development, background in, community development financial institutions, also a background in housing and other type of low-income housing and other community development background to help make those decisions to make sure we're providing access to credit to those that historically have not been able to get it.
Okay. Now, would the city put all of its funds into this bank, or would they still be scattered through banks around the city?
So we're looking now at the capitalization for this entity. Initially, we'll probably look into the general fund for just the operating dollars, and then the actual capitalization could come from the way of having the city issue a bond to provide some initial capitalization. We're also looking at other ideas in reference to by it becoming a community developed financial institutions. Traditional private banks could invest in this entity and get CRA credit. So we're trying to have it be as flexible as possible. So that way we can bring in public dollars, but also see if we can bring in private dollars as well. I know I've had conversations with social impact investors that are looking to do things in different ways. And so we're looking at a broad range of possibilities in reference to the capitalization for this entity. But the operation dollars more likely than not will come from the general fund to get it started. And we're following the model that's been used by the Accelerator Fund, which is a new entity to help Black and Brown developers in the city. And that's kind of an offshoot of the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation. And then also the Philadelphia Green Capital Corporation, which is an offshoot of the Philadelphia Energy Authority, which is helping emerging businesses and organizations in the sustainable energy space get started. And so we're using those two organizations as models for the Philadelphia Public Financial Authority.
Okay, but the question I was asking is, will the city have an account in this bank? Because the city has accounts with banks around the city where they issue, checks for, workers and different stuff. Will the city have an account in the public bank from which, will it basically say, okay, hey, we're the city, we have an account here. It's safe for you to have an account here.
So once we get the public bank up and running, it would only hold municipal deposits. We spent a lot of time doing research on this. It's not going to have a retail branch where individuals come in to make deposits or small businesses. This would be a municipal public bank holding municipal deposits as well as possible deposits from other government related agencies. And we created in that perspective because that gives us the greatest flexibility to open, but also it would reduce some of the regulatory challenges that you would have if you're a traditional bank. Because if you did the other things, you would have to have FDIC insurance, a number of other steps, as well as just the operational costs of, if you had a retail branch operation, then you're hiring, people that are going to be tellers, and you have security issues, and as I said, FDIC insurance, and you're marketing products. And we already have a number of other entities that do that, like United Bank. This is more to hold municipal deposits, so that way the city of Philadelphia doesn't have to put its money into a Wells Fargo or Citizens or other entities. We can hold our own deposits as well.
Okay. And I'd like to take it back to Larry McGlynn. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I just have one last thing I'd like to follow up with council member. We talked about a lot of things. You're one of the busiest members of council usually. Is there anything else that you'll be doing this spring or keeping an eye on?
So I was really concerned last year looking at the turnout from our election. We had 21% turnout in our election, which is abysmal. And we've got to do some things to change and get people more engaged in the voting process. I'm putting together a kind of a civics agenda of legislation. I'm bringing back public financing of elections. I'm looking at some of the eligibility requirements for people to run for office, especially city council. We're looking at inspector general and trying to make that position permanent. We're also looking at some of the conflict of interest laws. So we're looking at a whole set of areas. Some of these changes may be charter changes. So we are working with both the law department as well as the ethics board on this legislation. In fact, I'm talking to the ethics board later today about the legislation. So that's a package that we've been working on for some time. I've been working on public finance of elections going back to when I worked for Councilmember Tasco, and we had hearings regarding that back in 2006. So when you think about how we can change the dynamic of elections, I'm also going to continue conversations I've had regarding ranked choice voting. I know Senator Williams and I are going to look to have a collaborative conversation, maybe a joint city council, Pennsylvania State Senate conversation regarding ranked choice voting, because he's written some op-eds about it. I've done some research and introduced resolutions for hearings on that. And we've seen what's happened in New York with ranked choice voting. So looking at a lot of different things to kind of provide and move the civics agenda to get more people engaged in the voting process. And then I'm also still working on my asbestos legislation with the school district. When we came back to council in the fall, that was shortly after schools came back in session, and we still had a significant asbestos issue. And it's an issue that's been lingering, that my son had to deal with it at his school, and my mother had to deal with it 20 years ago when she was a teacher at Allen High School. So it's something that is still needs to be addressed. We're working on amendments so that way we can get those amendments in and get the legislation passed as well.
Councilmember Derek Green, thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you. Good seeing both of you. Happy New Year again.
Okay, we would like to thank Councilmember Derek Green for being with us here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia. Denise, I thought we tackled a lot of different topics there. I think you're on mute there, Denise.
Oh, okay. Well, now I'm not on mute. But the main one that I'm glad that he talked about was affordable housing. I'd like to know a little more about the housing trust and what it's supposed to do and what that could mean for affordable housing. But I'm glad that it's something that council is working on, because, there was another fire in New York where more than 10 people died because of something faulty in the building itself. And, we really have to deal with the fact that because of how much housing costs, you have people, bunching up together, because they can't afford to do it any other way.
That's right. That's right. So that's actually something we should probably do on a later show.
Sounds like a great interview.
Yeah. Dig into the Housing Trust Fund and learn a little bit more about that and make sure people understand what we're talking about. That's something we'll look into. So, Denise, thank you as always for that. And Lance, you have something you're going to share with us tonight.
Well, I want to thank our viewers for turning us on Comcast Channel 66 or listening to us on WPPM 106.5 FM. I wanted to make one more point about Senator Casey. The senator was talking about how there's all this information out there now, but people don't know how to sort out the good information from the bad information. And I was saddened that he didn't talk about the high stakes testing that's taken the place of civics classes in our high schools and current event classes in our high school. And I certainly hope he has a look over those issues to make sure that the next generation actually can figure out whether there is such a thing as a tree octopus. Even though it's on the internet, it doesn't make it so. And even though it's on OAN, it doesn't make it so. So teaching our young people civics and how to know what truth is very important. As I said earlier, I have some good news, which I recognize is unusual for me. The first thing I wanted to point out was the American Recovery Act has set aside money to help people who are struggling with their water bills. So there's now a grant program, and I'm trying to make sure that I can show everyone it. But it says allow select window or screen, entire screen. So here we go. So if people come to us to our webpage at hallmonitor.org, they can get more information. But here's a water assistance program for people who lost their jobs, who didn't get their unemployment compensation. This is a great program. It's $2,500 maximum to pay your water bill and another $2,500 to pay your sewer bill. And because the city of Philadelphia has a municipal water department, it really helps all of us if we can help our neighbors access this program. So I'm hoping some of the RCO leaders and some of the civic leaders and some of the ward leaders who are listening to us will take the time to let everyone in their areas know about this program. And that's really great news, because if we can get everyone who needs the help the help they need, the water department won't have an excuse to raise our bills. But the other good news I wanted to report was about something called surprise billing. And this has to do with medical billing. And one of the things that I think people are always shocked to find out, and again, it's giving me a little bit of trouble letting me do this. One of the things I think people are always shocked to find out is the number one reason why people file for bankruptcy is medical bills. And this is not something I'm just saying. The American Journal of Public Health found in 2019 that 66.5% of bankruptcies in the United States were due to medical issues. And one of the really big reasons for this was what was called surprise medical bills. And what that meant, what a surprise medical bill meant, was someone would go into the emergency room, somebody would see the doctor, and their insurance company said that's a hospital you can use. What that means is, in hospital language, is it's in network. So you would go to a hospital that your insurance company says, yes, you can use. You would see a doctor who your insurance company said you could use. And then the doctor would call in other doctors or send some tests to a lab. And you're in the emergency room, you're being treated, and you wouldn't know to ask. And no sane person would say, before you give me the medicine I need, before you read the x-ray, before you get the anesthesiologist to put me under so you can make the emergency operation, I want to know if that doctor is approved by my insurance company and in my network. So the way it worked was there was a scam. These anesthesiologists, the labs, other doctors weren't part of the network. The insurance company would pay the bill for the hospital, and then you would get a surprise bill. You would get a bill from the company, from the doctor who was part of a company that wasn't part of the network. And that bill could be literally for thousands of dollars. And I'm going to show all of our viewers a copy of a bill so they can perhaps see what it looks like. And just to get some idea of how difficult it is for any person to understand what's going on. And I'm hoping everyone can see this bill, but it shows what the provider's charges. And what that means is the doctor or the lab or the surgeon, whoever it is, they have something they charge you for. And then our allowance, what that means is this is what the insurance company is agreeing to pay for that service. And then it shows how much will be covered. So if you go to a doctor that's quote unquote in your network, meaning a doctor that has negotiated their fees with your insurance company, the doctor, even though they normally charge much more, the doctor has agreed to accept the amount that the insurance company offers. So that's what the covered benefits shows. And then there's an amount not paid. That's the difference between what they agreed to accept and what the insurance company paid. And as you can see at this bill, this is usually a very nominal cost, $2.43. And in this example of a bill, that's paid by a secondary insurance company. In the bad old days, before President Biden took control of HHS, what would happen would be the provider's charge would show the amount that the provider charged. And then because the provider was out of network, didn't have an agreement with your insurance company, the insurance company didn't have an agreed upon price. So the provider didn't say, the doctor didn't say, we'll take what the insurance company was willing to give. And the covered benefit would be the same amount the insurance company said they would cover, but the amount not paid, instead of being a nominal cost, would be literally thousands of dollars. And 30% of all people using emergency rooms got this surprise bill. And of those, 70% of the people had no idea what was going on, didn't understand it, and didn't know why the bill was that high, and didn't know who to contact because they didn't hire the doctor. They didn't see the anesthesiologist. They didn't know what lab was used to look at their blood work or to read their x-rays or to do their MRI. They had no idea. All they know is they went to a hospital that was in network, that was covered. They saw a doctor that was in network and was covered, and everything after that, they were in the emergency room. There's no way that they could have shopped around and found something. So on January 1st of this year, a bill that had been passed last year went into effect. And the reason why it took so long to go into effect was because the insurance companies and the corporations that represent these out-of-network doctors couldn't agree on how to protect consumers. And so Biden's Health and Human Services had to come up with the guidelines. And those guidelines now have come out. And what it means is that that if you go into the emergency room, you no longer have to worry about a surprise bill. What you are covered for is what will be covered. And if there's a discrepancy between the quote unquote out of network, the doctor, the anesthesiologist, the lab, the MRI operator, and the insurance company, they have to negotiate that. But the out of network doctor cannot charge the patient more than what the insurance company agreed. And so this is going to eliminate that 30% of the surprise billing. This is going to be a tremendous savings for people. Now, it will be a little difficult to enforce, and I'm hoping people will go to our webpage, hallmonitor.org, and find out about who is going to actually enforce this rule and who's going to make sure that nobody gets overcharged. Because unfortunately, we know that some of these corporations that hire doctors are there to make money. They're not there primarily to provide medical services as the doctors are. But the corporations who hire doctors and then refuse to negotiate with the insurance companies, these are private equity companies. These are venture funds. These are small businesses that are there to make a profit, not to develop and deliver medical need. And so we know it's going to be difficult to enforce, and the state of Pennsylvania has set up a program where they're going to help to enforce it. The federal government has set up a program where they're going to help to enforce it. And we also would be happy to help enforce it. If you look at your medical bill and you have a surprise bill, you're welcome to contact us again through our webpage, and we can help you work through the difficulties. Nobody should be forced to file for bankruptcy because they got sick and had hospital bills. No one should look at a $10,000, $15,000 bill because a corporation refused to negotiate with the insurance company and accept the normal payment. Now, it doesn't cover everything. If you're in good health and you decide to go to a doctor that's out of your network, you're responsible for that bill. This is limited to emergency services when a reasonable person could not know that the doctor providing the services was out of network. And I see we're running out of time, but this is an example of what happens when people are organized. It's been a long fight, 5 years in the making, 5-year fight. The head of HHS was putting consumers ahead of the corporations, and there's finally some relief for people, and that is the good news. The water fund that will help people pay their bills, and an elimination and an end to the surprise medical billing.
All right. Well, thank you very
That
much,
is good
Lance.
news.
That is very good news. So we'd like to thank Lance, as always, and Denise, as always. We'd like to thank our guest, Senator Robert Casey, and Councilmember Derek Green. Next week, we'll have Council members Isaiah Thomas and David O with us. So please stick around for that. And thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.